August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia. General Alfred Jodl reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front with cold, mathematical precision. His staff had calculated something that appeared inescapable: the mathematical physics of war. The Allied supply lines stretched over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to General George Patton's spearheading Third Army. The Americans have outrun their logistics. Patton will halt within days, perhaps hours. No army can sustain such advanced speeds without fuel. This wasn't guesswork. This was German military science based on decades of warfare experience. From his position at Hitler's Wolf Lair headquarters, Jodl analyzed what every German general understood intimately from experience. An armored division consumed approximately 150,000 gallons of fuel daily when advancing at combat speeds. The Americans were now 400 miles from their supply depots. The calculation was mathematically inescapable. Patton's Third Army would grind to a halt, giving the Wehrmacht time to regroup at the Seine, perhaps establish defensive positions that could hold until winter. The logic was flawless. The mathematics were irrefutable. History had proven it repeatedly. What Jodl didn't know was that 125 miles away from his calculations, 5,958 trucks were already rolling eastward in an endless convoy, headlights blazing in defiance of military doctrine, carrying 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express, a logistics operation so audacious that German military science had deemed it impossible, was about to shatter every assumption about how modern mechanized warfare actually functioned. Within 72 hours of those German calculations, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks would crash through German positions at the Seine. Within a week, they would liberate Paris. Within a month, they would stand at the German border. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds were about to receive a lesson in American logistics that would fundamentally redefine their understanding of modern warfare. Delivered not by generals or brilliant strategists, but by 23,000 truck drivers, approximately 75% of them African-American soldiers in a still segregated army, who turned a one-way highway system into the most efficient military supply line in history. The German General Staff's confidence in American logistical failure stemmed from decades of military experience and immediate recent observations. The Wehrmacht had pioneered blitzkrieg, revolutionized combined arms warfare, and understood intimately the tyranny of supply lines that had repeatedly stalled their greatest offensives. Their own campaigns had repeatedly collapsed when logistics failed to keep pace with tactical success. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's advance had founded not primarily from Soviet resistance, but from the catastrophic inability to supply forces across vast continental distances. German trucks broke down on Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still comprising 80% of German military transport, even in 1944, couldn't match the speed of panzer spearheads. Railway gauge differences between Germany and occupied territories meant supplies piled up hundreds of miles from the front lines. A typical German division still had nearly 10 times as many horses as motor vehicles, running on oats as much as oil. General Heinz Guderian, the brilliant panzer theorist who had pioneered mobile warfare, understood better than anyone that blitzkrieg had a fundamental limitation. Logistics couldn't sustain the operational tempo indefinitely. This constraint had broken the back of the Russian campaign. Why would the Americans be different? General Hasso von Manteuffel, who would command 5th Panzer Army in late 1944, had written in July, "The Americans faced the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, and repair parts constantly. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next. Paralysis. German intelligence had meticulously tracked American consumption rates with precision. A single Sherman tank burned 0.5 miles per gallon on roads, far worse cross-country. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily. An armoured division needed 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. 12,000 tons daily, transported 400 miles from the beaches over damaged roads through a transportation network the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat. General Friedrich Sieber, who would become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt in September 1944, calculated on August 20th with German precision. Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they don't, and perfect roads, which they don't, and no mechanical failures, which is physically impossible, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance more than another 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. The Wehrmacht had been correct about the supply crisis. Patton's Third Army was indeed consuming supplies faster than any army in history had ever consumed them. The advance was unsustainable by any known logistics doctrine. But the Germans had failed to account for something: American improvisation on a scale they had never conceived possible. On August 25, 1944, at 2:00 p.m., in a requisitioned French chateau near Ley, Lieutenant Colonel Lurin Ayards of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical officers. The math they presented was stark. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history. Traditional supply methods, railway transport, scheduled convoys, depot-to-front distribution had all collapsed under the strain. "Gentlemen," Ayards announced to the room of doubters, "we're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines. Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24. No stopping except for fuel and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily minimum." The name came from railway terminology. A red ball freight was an express shipment that took absolute priority over everything else. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The technical specifications defied German military doctrine in every respect. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks going forward, one for empties returning. 24-hour operations with headlights blazing, abandoning blackout discipline entirely. No stop policy except for fuel and mechanical failure. 5-minute convoy intervals, maintaining a 35 mph average speed. Mobile maintenance units stationed every 50 miles. Military police checkpoints removing any vehicle travelling below 25 miles per hour from the highway. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commanding the advanced section of ADSEC, Advanced Section Communication Zone, reviewed the projected numbers with skepticism bordering on disbelief. "We need 140 truck companies, 5 948 vehicles minimum, operating at 90% availability," he said. "That's impossible by any logistics textbook ever written." Yet within 36 hours, the impossible was operational. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 39 16th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 21 2-ton trucks, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells bound for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles east. These trucks represented American mass production perfection. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these vehicles by war's end, more trucks than the entire German military possessed of all types combined. They featured innovations German trucks hadn't: all-wheel drive as standard, not exception, automatic tyre inflation systems, waterproofing that allowed 30-inch fording depth, engines that ran on low-quality fuel without modification, heaters that actually functioned in winter. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express would have stunned Nazi racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate the route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers serving in a still segregated American military. These men, who couldn't eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America, were keeping the most celebrated white generals' armies in motion. They were driving trucks that cost hundreds of dollars each, carrying supplies worth thousands more, bearing responsibilities that challenged every prejudice Nazi ideology proclaimed. The drivers developed their own culture within hours of operations beginning. They painted slogans on their trucks: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They created their own traffic rules. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately. Mechanical failures were pushed into ditches. Any truck below 20 mph was considered a roadblock and was removed from the main route. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented. Units from Panzer-Lehr radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This violated everything German military doctrine taught. Headlights at night invited air attack. Continuous columns presented perfect artillery targets. No spacing between vehicles meant a single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy. Yet the Americans seemed unconcerned with German military logic. General Eberbach Edgar, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected growing alarm. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. It's not military science. It's mass production applied to warfare. What the Germans couldn't understand was that American logistics operated on entirely different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment, Americans relied on overwhelming volume. Where Germans conserved vehicles, Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure and planned accordingly. Where Germans followed strict military procedure, Americans improvised continuously. The numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express defied German calculations of what was logistically possible. In the first week, August 25th to 31st, 1944, 89,139 tons of supplies delivered. Daily average, 12,848 tons. Round-trip distance, 686 miles. Vehicle rotations, 5,958 trucks making 1.5 trip daily. Fuel consumed by the operation itself, 300,000 gallons daily. German logistics specialists captured these numbers from American documents and initially dismissed them as propaganda. But the numbers were verified through intercepted radio traffic and personal observation. The numbers were real, and they were accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that appeared physically impossible to German logistics officers. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus. Average convoy, 67 vehicles. Load per vehicle, 5 tons standard, 7 tons frequent overload. Time to cover 350 miles one way, 14 hours average. Turnaround time at each end, 2 hours. Vehicles in constant motion, 5,000 at any given moment from the total fleet. The Red Ball Express generated innovations hourly as drivers and mechanics solved problems German military science had declared insurmountable. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 daily mobile maintenance units performed repairs on the roadside. Mechanics developed a triage system. 15 minutes to fix or push it off the road into ditches to clear the highway. Parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed unrepairable. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When the designated Red Ball route became congested, drivers created alternate paths. They commandeered French buses to move personnel and free up trucks for cargo. They borrowed German vehicles, painting them olive drab and pressing them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbed. The Germans, observing this controlled chaos that somehow produced order, couldn't comprehend it. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, and proper procedures. The Americans violated every principle, yet their system accelerated rather than collapsed. The most stunning revelation for German observers was American fuel management. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just for its own operations, more than many German armies received for all purposes. Yet fuel never ran short. The Americans had created a parallel marvel that German intelligence hadn't even detected: Operation Pluto, an underwater pipeline network. Fuel flowed through underwater pipes from England across the English Channel beginning in September 1944. Forward fuel dumps were established every 25 miles along the Red Ball route. Tanker trucks ran their own parallel convoy system, ensuring no vehicle waited more than 10 minutes for refueling. General Major Walter Weilemont observed from aerial reconnaissance photographs, "The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. It's industrial overflow." Between August 1944 and May 1945, Operation Pluto delivered over 172 million gallons of fuel to France through its underwater pipes. The operation ultimately involved 17 separate pipelines delivering petroleum across the channel, while the Red Ball trucked supplies simultaneously. German military doctrine calculated that an armoured division could sustain 20 to 30-mile advances daily under optimal conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks on end. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armoured Division advanced 35 miles in morning operations, halted for resupply at noon. Red Ball trucks were waiting with fuel and ammunition. The division advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. This 67-mile single-day advance shattered German defensive planning, which assumed maximum 30-mile daily advances. General Heinz Guderian, reviewing the reports in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. No armoured force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical failures alone prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification. But intercepted American radio traffic confirmed it. More disturbing for German commanders, the Americans broadcast their positions openly without code, supremely confident in their ability to move faster than Germans could react. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were catastrophic for Wehrmacht planning. Every assumption about American military capability required revision. The report contained observations that defied German military science. Americans wasted vehicles prodigiously, abandoning damaged trucks rather than repairing them. Drivers operated on stimulants for days, violating every principle of personnel management. No camouflage discipline, making the entire system vulnerable to air attack that never came. mechanical failure rates of 30% daily, simply overwhelmed by redundancy. Fuel consumption that would bankrupt any European military. Field Marshal Walter Model's response revealed growing desperation. If these reports are accurate, we face not a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they don't fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics. The Red Ball Express drivers paid a physical price German observers couldn't fully see. Drivers operated for 72 straight hours, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine stimulants. Accidents killed approximately 300 drivers during the Red Ball's operational period. Trucks collided in fog, overturned on damaged roads, burned when overheated engines ignited. Yet morale remained extraordinarily high. These men, mostly African American soldiers, denied equal rights at home, understood they were making history. They were proving Hitler's racial theories wrong with every mile driven, every ton delivered. The Germans, observing this chaos that somehow produced order, understood they faced something unprecedented. Captured German officers provided eloquent testimony to the Red Ball Express's impact. Oberleutnant Hans Paulmann, taken prisoner in September 1944, told interrogators, "We knew we'd lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule, waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You've industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension." The psychological impact on German forces was devastating. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear American trucks all night, every night. Endless motors, endless supplies. They had 3 rounds per rifle, while Americans were bringing millions of rounds. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that demoralized troops as effectively as actual logistics. On August 29, 1944, the Red Ball Express reached its peak performance. Approximately 132 truck companies operating 5,958 vehicles carried 12,242 tons of supplies to forward depots. This represented more tonnage than Germany's entire logistics system in France could move through all methods combined on their best day. This record would go unmatched during the remaining 14 weeks of the operation's existence. As the front moved east, the Red Ball Express adapted with speed that stunned German planning officers. When the original route to Chartres became insufficient, Americans created extensions overnight. The White Ball Express ran from Rouen to Paris. The Green Diamond ran from Cherbourg to railroad transfer points. The Red Lion ran from Bayeux to Brussels. The ABC Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi route was established. Each new route was operational within 48 hours of conception. German staff officers required weeks to plan similar operations. The vehicles themselves amazed German engineers. The GMC CCKW 21 2-ton truck represented mass production perfection. Specifications included 269.5 cubic inch displacement, inline 6-cylinder GMC 270 engine producing 91.5 to 104 horsepower, all-wheel drive as standard, a 40-gallon fuel capacity, automatic tyre inflation systems, maximum speed of 45 mph, and approximately 300-mile range. More than 572,500 units of this truck and its variants were produced during World War II, constituting nearly 25% of total U.S. truck production and 70% of all 21 2-ton trucks. The predominance of African American drivers in the Red Ball Express created cognitive dissonance for Nazi racial theorists. Nazi ideology declared blacks inferior, incapable of technical tasks, lacking initiative. Yet these drivers were performing logistics miracles that German forces couldn't match. The African American soldiers understood the irony. Every mile they drove proved Hitler wrong. They were fighting racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Red Ball Express consumption of vehicles reached staggering proportions. By late September, mechanical attrition had become catastrophic. Average vehicle lifespan, 10,000 miles compared to normal 30,000-mile service life. Daily deadline rate, 30% of all vehicles. Engines replaced, 500 weekly. Tires consumed, 10,000 weekly. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned, 5,000 plus. Yet the operation never slowed. American production had anticipated such losses. Ships arrived weekly at French ports carrying hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers were trained in 2 days and thrown into convoys. German calculations showed Americans destroying more trucks weekly than the Wehrmacht possessed in France. Yet their transport capacity increased rather than decreased. They had achieved something Germans thought impossible: logistics faster than consumption. When the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued on November 16, 1944, its impact had already been written into military history. Total cargo delivered 412,193 tons. Total distance covered 122 million ton miles. Trucks employed daily average 5,958 vehicles, with peak operations reaching 7,000. Drivers involved 23,000 total. Operating days 82 consecutive days. Fuel consumed 57 million gallons. Tires worn out 180,000. Vehicles destroyed 5,000 plus. Cost approximately $100 million. Yet Americans considered this cheap. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Colonel John D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander's son, later wrote, "The spectacular nature of the advance through France was due in great measure to the men who drove the Red Ball trucks as to those who drove the tanks." The advance across France could not have been made without the Red Ball truck drivers. An unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was the revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway Express, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for historical records. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. General Friedrich Schultz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization. Thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what most surprised him about American forces. His answer, "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers." The Red Ball Express proved that in modern warfare, logistics is not support. It is the main effort. The German generals who laughed at American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender documents in May 1945, defeated by 23,000 truck drivers, mostly African American soldiers, who revolutionized warfare at 35 miles per hour. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, supreme German commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culminating point where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war." The road to victory had been paved with trucks,